Veterans of the Cincinnati Bengals are officially reported to training camp, and depending on when you're listening to this episode, training camp might have started. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. You can subscribe to this show on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcast. It makes it really easy for you to become an everydayer, and shout out to all of you who listen to us every day and make us your first listen when you start your day. And if you're new to the show, we've been doing this show for very long time now, years and years. And James also covers the Bengals over at allbengals.com. And we don't introduce ourselves very often, but I figured today, with the start of training camp, the start of the 2023 season officially underway, I would just give folks that are new to the show a little bit of a quick rundown of who we are. This episode of Locked On Bengals brought to you by eBay Motors. Championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. Go check out the auto parts available at eBay Motors and the eBay Guaranteed Fit. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. James, let's dive into some of the news that we didn't get to earlier this week. And for the everydayers who checked out yesterday's episode, Mock Turtle Soup was served, and Mike Brown, Duke Tobin, the Bengals' top coaches all met with the media. We talked about some of the big takeaways from that luncheon, including a lot of the Mike Brown quotes or non-quotes, talking about the salary cap, talking about Joe Burrow's extension. Today, we're going to talk about some of the transactions that also transpired a little bit of time ago, depending on when you're listening, that we didn't get to. And that includes some of the guys added to the PUP list, most notably Chidobe Awuzie, which is where we're going to start the show, and Lyle Collins, which we'll talk about as well. And the Bengals bringing back Mitchell Wilcox at tight end. But let's start with Cheeto, James, because the tweets, at least my tweet about Cheeto going on the PUP list, stirred up a lot of concern. And I tried to explain to people that this isn't the PUP list that means that you have to miss 4 games, or some people thought it was 6 games. It's now 4 games if you make it to the regular season on the PUP list. But just a quick distinction for those of you who are concerned. There are technically 2 PUP lists. There's the active PUP list, physically unable to perform. That's what you're on in the preseason. You can be activated from the active PUP list at any time and then rejoin the team. If you make it to the regular season and you're still on the PUP list, you revert to the reserve PUP list, reserve physically unable to perform list. And if you make it there, then you have to miss at least 4 games. And then when you're activated from the PUP list, you have a 21-day window to practice with the team to be activated to the 53-man roster. If you're not activated to the 53-man roster in that time, then you revert to the PUP list for the rest of the season. But all the players currently on the list for the Bengals, which includes Mitchell Wilcox, who the Bengals recently signed, Chidobe Awuzie, Lyle Collins, and Devin Cochran, the college free agent signee from last year, offensive lineman, those guys can be activated at any time. And that also applies to Chidobe Awuzie, who we speculated recently, James, and talked about how soon he might be ready.
Yeah, he's ready. Spoiler, he's ready. The expectations are that he was, I've said it, be ready for week 1. And I don't know if he's ready for week 1, but he doesn't have to be because it's still July. And so I think we're going to see Cheeto early in camp. And everything I've heard about him, about his progress, all of those things lines up with what I saw during OTAs when he was moving around. And obviously I posted video on social, moving around great, planting, stopping, starting, all of those things. And Lou Anarumo echoed those same feelings and thoughts over some Mock Turtle Soup. So when you have that and you have it aligning, I think you put him on the PUP list initially, almost to take a little pressure off of him, because it isn't about him being ready right now. It's about him being ready on September 10th, I believe it is, against Cleveland week 1, the same place that he obviously hurt his knee on Halloween. So that's the goal. And I think he's on track to do that, which is just, it's a game changer for this defense. Jake, I was looking at the defense in depth and kind of doing a first roster projection pre-training camp style. And it's deep, but that cornerback room feels much, much different if you just X'd out Cheeto. Let's say the pup list for a couple of games, right? Let's say it would be the 4 games. That defense just feels different because now suddenly there's a bunch of question marks that I don't think are there if you have Cheeto. And I don't expect him to play, by the way, at the level he was playing before his injury right away. I think that's unrealistic. But even if he plays at 80% of what he's capable of, I certainly think he's their best outside cornerback on the team.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. He's the best outside corner on the team going into the season based on what we've seen from him throughout his time in Cincinnati. Cam Taylor-Britt has a chance to continue to build on his 2022 and battle for that role, as he might be the Bengals' #1 corner of the future. DJ Turner pending. DJ Ivy, let's make sure we give credit to the 7th-round pick, pending if he shocks us and continues to draw praise from coaches and work his way up the depth chart. But if it's not Chidobe Awuzie, who Lou Anarumo, like you said that he had full confidence in Cheetah, said he's moving great, then who is it playing corner opposite Cam Taylor-Britt? Is it Sidney Jones? Do they go with a veteran there? Is DJ Turner ready to go? Who steps in to that role opposite Cam Taylor-Britt? Because we've talked about liking the depth at corner, like you said, but for me, that always came with the understanding that those guys have had the time, mostly DJ Turner, to get their feet underneath them, because sometimes it takes a little bit of time for rookie corners, as we saw with Cam Taylor-Britt last year, needed a little bit of time, got onto the field, and then continued to get better throughout the season. Is Sidney Jones the guy that you're trusting? We like the Sidney Jones signing. He has veteran experience, and maybe that's as simple as that, and he would be the guy. And we'll see who's taking CB1 snaps with Cam Taylor-Britt in training camp right away. I'm sure there will be a rotation there. There was in the offseason program, but either way, it's a step down from Cheeto. So if he is ready, which I think we expect him to be, judging from what various coaches and other personnel like Duke Tobin, Mike Brown, if they talked about you. I don't think Mike Brown did. Came up with Duke Tobin, didn't it? Yeah. He said that Cheeto could be up and going soon. Wasn't sure about LC, who we'll talk about a little bit later. So if those guys, or if Cheeto is ready to go, it's a huge boost, as we've discussed, for the secondary.
It is. It's a dilemma if he is out. And you mentioned Sidney Jones the 4th. And I think he's the guy that you look at when you put the roster together and you say, could he be beat out? And I know the Bengals, they're going to say, all right, well, there's competition everywhere and all of those things. But like Mike Hilton isn't getting pushed. Cam Taylor-Britt's on the roster. DJ Turner was your 2nd-round pick. He's on the roster. So where could you push? And you could say Jalen Davis, and I think some would, but he's your nickel, clearly your backup nickel. So I think it is Sidney Jones. And so will Alan George flip it and make it him and beat out Sidney Jones for potentially the 6th cornerback spot? I don't know if it would be that. It might be the 4th. Maybe we saw last year how Lou Anarumo kind of used young corners and young defensive backs in general. You got to earn that trust. So DJ Turner might not be in the rotation right away, and that isn't a huge deal if that's the case. So we'll see. But I think that's, if I'm Alan George, that's who I'm eyeing. If I'm DJ Ivy, the 7th rounder out of Miami, that's who I'm eyeing, is the guy that I want to be better than and have to beat out for a roster spot, because it probably is when you look at the path to the roster.
There is a real competition at the back of that corner room. I do think it starts with Sidney Jones. He's just got so much experience in the league, playing at an average to above average level with Seattle, with Jacksonville, a lot of that in a backup capacity as well, or a not full-time capacity. The most snaps he's ever taken in a season was 730 with Seattle in 2021. It's also his best season according to PFF. But he had some valuable experience with Jacksonville, with Philly before that as well. And so that's what you're talking about beating out. And that's the challenge for these younger guys on the roster. But great news for Cheeto, I think, despite the pup list designation, the way that Duke Tobin and defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo talked about his readiness, I think is encouraging, and we'll get to see very, very soon how he's doing. Coming up next, Mitch Wilcox is back. LC also on the PUP list, but a bit of a different feeling around LC. We'll continue these conversations in a minute.
Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes in life, we're faced with tough choices, and the path forward isn't always clear. And so, whether you're dealing with decisions about your career, relationships, anything else in life, therapy helps you stay connected to what you really want to do, how you can navigate it, so you can move forward with confidence and with excitement. Trusting yourself to make decisions that align with your values is like anything. The more you practice it, the easier it gets. And that's why BetterHelp is here for you. If you've thought about starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. And all you have to do to get started is fill out a brief questionnaire that gets you matched with a licensed therapist. And maybe it's not the right match after a few sessions. Well, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, betterhelp.com/lockedon.
James, let's talk about LC next. The other big name on the PUP list, the other 2022 starter on the PUP list. There has been a lot of discussion this offseason around the right tackle position. We know that some fans are eager to see someone besides Jonah Williams taking snaps at right tackle. And even some great offensive line evaluators, great football evaluators would prefer LC if he was healthy. And we mean, when we say that, all the way healthy. Like best seasons in Dallas healthy, not last year playing through injury healthy. Unfortunately, LC is quite a ways removed from being fully healthy at this point. And coming off that ACL, it isn't clear from what we've heard that he will be ready at any point in the preseason. And out of all of these guys, maybe Mitch Wilcox is another one because he is coming off an injury as well. I think LC is going to start the season on the PUP list. And you can go back to, the conversations we had with Brian Callahan after the offseason program as well, and you'll hear some similar hints, I think, where keeping LC on the roster, if they do indeed choose to do so, which seems fairly likely, they would have a bit of a cost, an injury settlement cost associated with releasing LC at this point. And they've said all along they want to give him every opportunity to show that he can be a good player when he's healthy. You get that reinforcement a couple weeks into the season whenever he is ready. And that is a big boon. Like Cheeto is coming back to the corner room for the top of the depth. I think that LC getting back there would really help you from a first veteran off the bench perspective, and would be really cool in that extra lineman package the Bengals like to run sometimes if he is an extra lineman in there playing that third tackle spot.
Yeah, I agree. I think, especially after Mixon's reworking, you can afford this luxury. And what a luxury it is, because you don't have to rush him back. You don't have to say, hey, man, just throw a brace on it and give us what you got and keep us above water. You can really let him heal. And I think Lel is, and I haven't talked to him, but I think just knowing him a little bit, he is going to make sure he heals, because it's such a crucial time in his career because of what happened last year. And if he comes back and he just doesn't look anywhere near like the guy that a lot of NFL teams have come to know, like Bengals fans were expecting last year when he signed, what's next for him, right? He's 30, injury prone it was the label, and it's tough to find jobs that way. So I think he will take his time. I think the PUP list is likely. And at the same time, I think it's probably best for him and best for the team, because we've seen what happens with attrition, especially at the offensive line and in that offensive line room. And look at who they're banking on at right tackle. I've had Jonah Williams is back all offseason long, but he's by far let me think about this. Yeah, the most injury prone guy on the starting line that we know of. as of now. He's dealt with multiple injuries, missed his entire rookie year, got hurt at the end of 2020. Obviously, last year played through the injury most of the year, so he was hurt, not injured necessarily, but it was too much to overcome. So yeah, he has a lot to prove, but you can't bank on him staying healthy. And so La'el Collins is waiting in the wings, so to speak. And obviously Jackson Carman's in the mix for that job too. I just think Jonah's far and away the favorite. So I love the idea of them giving La'el time. And now there might not be the cap pressure or concern, even though it's a lot of money to spend at right tackle. We know how much Jonah's making, nearly $13 million. We know La'el, the cap. I mean, you're spending a lot of cap resources on that right tackle spot, but they were this close, and right tackle's been an issue in each of the past 2 years during their deep playoff run. So I think it makes sense. Keep him, get him healthy, because you just might need him when it counts the most.
Yeah, and it would be a nice bonus if LC is your first tackle off the bench. He has experience playing a number of offensive line spots as well.
Well, and he's Orlando Brown insurance too, because you could always put Jonah back at left tackle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what I think would happen. Let's say Orlando got dinged up for a half or something, or a game. I think Jonah would move, and then if La'el was healthy, he would just come right back in and play that right tackle spot.
Right. And like you said, we'll see what happens with Jackson Carman. He has a big preseason here to prove that he can compete for NFL starting level play and NFL
go win the job.
Snaps.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I think one of the best outcomes for the Bengals is Jackson Carman forces their hand and outperforms a very motivated Jonah Williams to win the right tackle job. I mean,
it would be great.
That means Jackson Carman has taken a massive step forward in many, many ways.
Sure.
You talked about Jonah Williams being having injury history himself, and he does. He's, last season aside, mostly removed from injuries that have taken him out of the game. He obviously had the rookie year issue. He missed a lot of time in his second year. 2021, he played the whole season, 1,301 snaps. Last year, he still played 1,100 snaps. 1,131 snaps. So he did get injured, and he was playing through injury, and he had the kneecap issue that required surgery in the playoffs. So hopefully he just is able to avoid weird kneecap stuff and can just stay healthy and return to that 2021 form when he was primed. And you go back to our season previews last year, I thought for a big jump to being one of the top half tackles at left tackle in the NFL.
That's a perfect example. If something like that happens, I don't think Jonah plays the next week and stays in if La'el is on the bench. I think they'll say, no, get healthy. We have another guy behind you. I think last year it was the drop off was so far.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, man, if he can get out there, get out there. And it was just like that with all these guys. I mean, La'el played through stuff, and it's because of the drop off. And now I don't think there would be nearly the drop off if you had to go to, well, let's say in week 7
mm-hmm.
or week 3. Let's say he avoids pup and it's week 3, whatever. But that would be a nice aspect of it too, is if Jonah does get nicked up, you can say, all right, get healthy. Don't play through this for months and months and months, because obviously it affected his play. It was his worst season last year for sure.
And you made a good point earlier as well, just to make sure this doesn't get lost, because I thought it was a good point that it could be, this is one of the things that the Bengals are talking about, being able to fit into the salary cap after Joe Mixon reworked his deal. It could be that they got to a point and they decided, you know what, we actually want to keep LC for that insurance. And we'll see. Time will tell here, obviously. This is speculative. But it could be that extra $3-4 million that they save on the cap with Joe Mixon's new deal is enough to keep LC to fit in Joe Burrow's extension, to fit in T. Higgins' extension, because those are going to lead to cap hits this year if they get done. So that could be as simple as that. And I thought that was a really good point. Coming up next.
Yeah. Look at you praising me. I'll take it. I make a good point every other show.
Sometimes. Gotta give credit where it's due. Coming up next, Mitchell Wilcox back with the Bengals. This is something that we talked about for quite a while, adding a little bit to that tight end room, but also on the pup list. We'll talk about that tight end room a little bit. And a pretty cool thing the Bengals are doing. Give it a shout out because we give credit where it's due. Coming up next.
He's back. Mitch Wilcox, the tight end everybody wanted the Bengals to sign. They were on pins and needles all offseason about actually, anytime the tight end position has come up in recent months, I feel like we've mentioned him, Jake, and the Bengals signed him officially on Monday. They put him on the PUP list. He's going to be back soon. Had off-season surgery. I don't want to comment on the exact surgery because I need to confirm, but he's close to 100% from what I've heard. So good to go there. I have a take for you. I'm completely fine with the Bengals tight end room. I don't think it's great, but it's literally the same room as last year. But they've added a piece in Irv Smith Jr. and swapped him out for Hayden Hurst. Like, I think it's fine. I don't think it's great, but I think the guys behind Irv Smith Jr. will know their roles, and he's going to be their pass catching threat. And if Smith gets hurt, they won't use the tight ends. They won't throw to them much. And if they do, it'll just be here and there, and they'll adjust their offense a bit. What do you think?
I think that we've talked about this tight end room, and I think that you're right that the top is pretty similar. The Hayden Hurst, Irv Smith comparison, very different stylistically, as we discussed throughout the offseason when they signed Irv Smith, but similar in terms of quality. You would hope that from a style perspective, you get something a little bit flashier, a little bit more explosive from Irv Smith, but the depth is literally identical, like you said. And last year, when they lost Hayden Hurst at times, they stayed afloat. In fact, they won, I think, every game that Hayden Hurst missed. I think. So what's to say that they can't survive if they have depth questions at tight end again? It's surviving, right? It's not if they would have drafted one of these guys that we were talking about. If Sam Laporta falls to them in the second round, you're hoping that you're doing a little bit more than surviving. If you need to go to your tight end 2 and promote him to tight end 1. And I think this year it is more surviving. But on the upside, all of these guys very familiar with what the Bengals do, very familiar with the system. And if they do have to play a little bit more, they should at least not be lost out there. They should be able to play fast and understand what they're being asked to do.
I agree. I think that's a big part of it. I am curious. Do you think they'll keep all 4?
I mean, given the history of the guys they have, Drew Sample coming off a season-ending injury, Wilcox currently hurt, Irv Smith has a history of not making it through a season. It feels like 4 that this could be a position where they go a little bit heavy if they don't think they can get one of these guys to the practice squad. If Mitchell Wilcox can come back for training camp, and you said that he's close and practice in the preseason, I wouldn't be shocked by 4. At the same time, we've talked about how tight the competitions are across this roster, where if you count the names, 2 to 3 free roster spots that they have to decide on for all the positions where they have roster competitions. And you could see them potentially try to sneak a guy onto the practice squad here. My gut is saying this is a spot where they go a little bit heavy and keep 4. What do you think?
I think almost the opposite. I think Devin Asiasi really needs to show that he belongs.
I just think from an insurance perspective, with some of the injuries that these guys have had lately, they might feel forced.
And maybe at the same time, it gets really tight. And so I think going 3 at tight end, rolling the dice on Asiasi clearing waivers, I think there's a pretty good shot at that. Or Wilcox, for that matter. He was out of the league all offseason. It's not like anyone else signed him. So I think that part's interesting. But you're right that they are dealing with some injuries there too. And so which way do you go? I think that's an interesting balance, especially if you keep 7 receivers, knowing the depth they have in that offensive line room. They may be forced the other way to only keep 3 tight ends and hope that they make it back to the practice squad, whatever guy is the odd man out.
Mitchell Wilcox, am I reading his history right, has been on the 53-man roster since 2021. He was on the practice squad in 2020. He was activated from the practice squad in January 2021. And I believe he was signed as an unrestricted free agent.
He was active last year. Yeah,
in March last year. So he was with the team last year on the 53, now back with the team. There's a pretty good shot for Mitchell Wilcox to make this team again.
That's what I'm saying. So I think Asiasi's the one that would have to make the push. And so we'll see. Maybe he can. And obviously he was on the team for most of last year. And like I always say, these things usually solve themselves one way or the other. So,
And Asiasi was, of course, acclaimed last year, and they needed depth. But last year, I mean, they were primed to go into the season with 3 tight ends last year until they needed it. So that's the question: is do they feel that need for depth strong enough to feel like they have to keep the 4th guy? Maybe we should do a way too early 53-man projection one of these days when the Bengals are off and we need to fill a day. Maybe we should do a way too early 53-man and compare it to our results later.
Fill a day. It's going to be close because there's only like 4 spots available.
Yeah, I say
So
fill a
unless
day
there's
tongue in
injury.
cheek. I mean, because there's so much going on in training camp, but there are days they don't practice and we don't have practice reports to give. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think it would be a good idea. You know what else was a good idea?
Yeah.
The Bengals coming out with an all access show that's going to give a behind the scenes look at the team. I think there's a lot of people, fans that were wondering about this. And it's one more thing that we'll have to pay attention to for the show, to do the show. But the Bengals announced they're going to have a show called From the Jungle, Bengals All Access, a 30-minute documentary show that will give fans a behind the scenes look at the team about different stadium renovations. It's said to be Hard Knocks-esque. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, when Bengals Social on Reddit, of all places, announced this essentially over a month ago, they were looking for name ideas, and they actually took a name suggestion from a fan. And I think that was actually a pretty cool story because that fan, I think, was rewarded. It's going to be called From the Jungle, like you said, I think. And their description in the Reddit post was, "We have an exciting new all-access show coming this season. It will be Hard Knock style that shows behind-the-scenes content of what it's like inside the organization." They wanted the thoughts on name ideas because they iterated a lot of jungle-related things and day-related things, and seemed like they wanted to go a different direction than the day-related stuff. So From the Jungle should be pretty cool. I'm excited for it, James. We've been asking for something like this for a while. At least a couple of years. Remember the Colts doing their inside the draft room
Sure.
thing? That's really, and I think I off recording suggested you guys should really do something with the draft room once, and I think they were thinking about it. I told Callahan one time we were talking to him, it'd be so cool to see draft boards like 15, 20 years later, 10, 15, 20 years later, so we could reflect on and see where teams' draft boards were, kind of like a what's the thing where you dig and put it in the ground? Time capsule?
Time capsule. Yep.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. Not doing that, but this show's going to be pretty cool too.
It will, for sure. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, looking forward to the first day of training camp practices to tell you about as well, getting an idea of who is lining up where. Jonah Williams, notably, not on the PUP list. That means he's been cleared. That's a little nugget that we didn't really talk about very much, but with the PUP list guys named and Jonah Williams working on the side in the offseason program and minicamp, like we speculated he might be, we should expect to see him at right tackle. So where's he lining up? What kind of defensive line combinations do we get? Who's taking snaps opposite Cam Taylor-Britt at corner? These are answers that we will have for you, hopefully, after training camp practice number 1, which we will cover right here on Locked On Bengals as soon as we can after practice on Wednesday. Until then, Bengals fans, thanks for listening to this episode of Locked On Bengals podcast, of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.